March 11, 1943. Approximately 0340 hours in the North Atlantic, 320 miles southwest of Iceland. The frigid darkness concealed what would become one of the most revolutionary moments in anti-submarine warfare. Within minutes, a German U-boat commander would experience a weapon system so devastating that it would fundamentally alter underwater combat forever. The Hedgehog Anti-Submarine mortar was about to prove that surface vessels could kill submarines with a precision and lethality that defied every assumption the Kriegsmarine had made about convoy defense. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. German naval intelligence had assured U-boat commanders that Allied depth charges remained their primary threat, weapons that were predictable, avoidable, and rarely fatal to a well-handled submarine. The idea that a surface ship could fire 24 projectiles simultaneously, creating an inescapable pattern of destruction, seemed impossible. Yet Commander Rachel Morrison of the destroyer HMS Vanessa was about to demonstrate exactly that capability against U-boats that had terrorized Atlantic convoys for years. By early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached its most critical phase. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than Allied shipyards could replace them. The United Kingdom's survival depended entirely on convoys bringing food, fuel, and war materials across the Atlantic. If the supply line broke, Britain would starve, and any invasion of Europe would become impossible. The U-boat arm, the Kriegsmarine's undersea force, had grown from a handful of submarines in 1939 to over 400 operational boats by 1943. These submarines operated in coordinated wolf packs, groups of 8 to 20 U-boats that gathered around convoys and attacked simultaneously from multiple directions. The tactic developed by Admiral Karl Donitz had proven devastatingly effective. Traditional convoy defense relied on depth charges, barrel-shaped explosives rolled off the stern of escort vessels. These weapons had fundamental limitations that German commanders understood and exploited. Depth charges required the attacking ship to pass directly over the submarine's position, forcing the vessel to lose sonar contact at the critical moment of attack. The submarine commander, hearing the escort approach, could take evasive action in the blind period when the attacking ship had no sonar contact. Depth charges exploded at preset depths, but if the submarine dove deeper or rose higher than expected, the weapons were useless. The blast pattern from traditional depth charges was relatively small, perhaps 50 feet in diameter for a lethal hit. A submarine 100 feet away from the explosion might suffer minor damage or none at all. Most critically, depth charges exploded whether they hit anything or not, making it impossible to know if an attack had succeeded or if the submarine had escaped. These limitations meant that destroying a U-boat required dozens or even hundreds of depth charges, dropped in careful patterns over hours of pursuit. Most attacks failed completely. German submariners had developed tactics to exploit every weakness in the depth charge system. They would dive deep immediately after attacking, below the typical depth charge settings. They would change course violently once they knew an escort was approaching, moving perpendicular to their original heading. Some boats would release oil, debris, and even personal items to create false evidence of destruction, convincing escorts they had succeeded while the submarine escaped. The most brazen commanders would actually surface after dark and run on diesel engines to recharge batteries and reposition, knowing that escorts rarely detected surface submarines at night. These tactics had created a terrible kill ratio. In 1942, it required an average of 250 depth charges to destroy a single U-boat. Some submarines survived dozens of attacks over their operational careers. The German submariners, while respecting the danger of convoy escorts, had confidence born from repeated survival. Into this desperate situation came a weapon that would change everything. The Hedgehog Anti-Submarine mortar had been developed by the British Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, an organization tasked with creating unconventional solutions to naval problems. The concept was revolutionary yet elegant. Instead of dropping explosives behind the ship, fire them ahead while sonar contact was still maintained. Instead of blanket coverage hoping for proximity kills, use contact fuses that only exploded on direct impact. Instead of single weapons dropped sequentially, fire 24 projectiles simultaneously in a circular pattern. The Hedgehog system consisted of a steel framework mounting 24 spigot mortar launchers arranged in 4 rows of 6. Each launcher held a single projectile, a 65-pound bomb with a contact fuse and 35 pounds of Torpex explosive, significantly more powerful than the TNT used in depth charges. The entire salvo could be fired in less than 1 second, with all 24 projectiles airborne. The projectiles followed ballistic trajectories, landing in an elliptical pattern approximately 250 feet ahead of the firing ship and covering an area roughly 120 feet in diameter. The genius of the system lay in its contact fuses. Unlike depth charges that exploded at preset depths, regardless of target presence, Hedgehog bombs only detonated on physical impact with a submarine's hull. This meant that if you heard an explosion, you had hit something solid underwater. If the salvo produced no explosions, you had missed, but you hadn't wasted time celebrating false victories or been deceived by debris releases. The contact fuse system also created psychological warfare. U-boat commanders couldn't use their traditional escape tactics because they didn't know where in the water column the weapons would hit them. Diving deep offered no protection if a Hedgehog bomb struck while descending. Turning sharply was useless if you turned into the pattern rather than away from it. Most terrifyingly for submariners, the weapons gave no warning. Depth charges could be heard splashing into the water, giving precious seconds to take evasive action. Hedgehog projectiles fell silently through the air and entered the water with minimal disturbance. The first indication of an attack was often the explosion as the bomb penetrated the pressure hull. British and American naval forces had begun installing Hedgehog systems on escort vessels throughout 1942, but results had been mixed initially. Crews trained on traditional depth charge tactics struggled to adapt to the new weapon. The requirement to maintain steady course and speed during attack, necessary for accurate firing, contradicted years of training that emphasized aggressive maneuvering. Some captains distrusted the contact fuse system, believing that weapons that only exploded on direct hits would produce fewer kills than traditional depth charges. What these skeptics failed to understand was that the old system's apparent hits were almost always misses, with submarines escaping despite massive expenditures of munitions. Commander Rachel Morrison of HMS Vanessa understood the Hedgehog's potential immediately. A career naval officer who had commanded escort vessels since 1940, she had experienced the frustration of depth charge attacks firsthand. She had watched oil slicks in debris fields that supposedly confirmed kills, only to have the same submarines identified attacking convoys weeks later. She had burned through entire magazines of depth charges, 150 weapons or more, without achieving a single confirmed destruction. When Vanessa received her Hedgehog installation in January 1943, Morrison made it her mission to master the system. She drilled her crew relentlessly on the approach and firing sequence. She studied the ballistic tables until she could calculate impact points instinctively. Most importantly, she trained her sonar operators to maintain perfect contact during the attack run, the single most critical factor for Hedgehog's success. Morrison's executive officer, Lieutenant Catherine Reynolds, shared her commander's conviction about the new weapon. Reynolds had lost her previous ship to a U-boat torpedo and understood viscerally the need for more effective anti-submarine weapons. Together, Morrison and Reynolds transformed Vanessa's anti-submarine team into specialists, practitioners of a new form of naval warfare that few in the fleet yet understood. By March 1943, Vanessa was escorting convoy HX-229, a formation of 40 merchant ships carrying vital cargo from New York to Liverpool. The convoy had been routed north of the usual transatlantic track to avoid known U-boat concentrations, but German naval intelligence had predicted the movement. U-boat headquarters in France had positioned a wolf pack of 17 submarines, designated Group Raubgraf, across the convoy's projected path. The trap was set perfectly, or so the Germans believed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The U-boats began shadowing the convoy on March 10th, transmitting position reports to coordinate a mass attack. Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted these transmissions and warned the convoy escorts. But with 17 U-boats positioned around the merchant ships, contact was inevitable. The first attacks came after dark on March 10th, with 3 merchantmen torpedoed in quick succession. The convoy scattered slightly as escorts raced to counterattack, but the U-boats dove deep and escaped in the confusion. As dawn approached on March 11th, Morrison knew the U-boats would attempt one final attack before daylight forced them to submerge and break contact. Her prediction proved accurate at 0340 hours when Vanessa's sonar operator Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell reported a contact bearing 045 degrees relative, range 2,800 yards. The return was strong and steady, clearly a submarine running submerged at periscope depth, likely preparing to fire torpedoes at the convoy's starboard column. Morrison ordered action stations, bringing Vanessa to full readiness without using the general alarm that might alert the submarine. The crew had practiced this silent approach dozens of times. Hedgehog crews moved to their stations, checking firing circuits and confirming ready status with hand signals. The bridge team calculated the approach vector, determining the course and speed needed to place Vanessa in perfect firing position. Morrison took personal control of the approach, her eyes moving between the compass, the sonar repeater showing target bearing and range, and the sea ahead where dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern horizon. The submarine, later identified as U-657 under the command of Commander Heinrich Goldnitz, was completely unaware of the approaching threat. Goldnitz was an experienced officer with 2 years of Atlantic operations and 11 confirmed ship sinkings. He had survived multiple depth charge attacks and had confidence in his boat and crew. His sonar operator had detected Vanessa's approach, but Goldnitz assumed it was a standard depth charge attack. He planned to fire his remaining torpedoes at the convoy, then dive to 600 feet and evade in the traditional manner that had worked successfully many times before. What Goldnitz didn't know was that HMS Vanessa carried a weapon system unlike anything he had encountered. At 2,000 yards range, Morrison ordered course adjustments to center the target in Vanessa's approach path. The destroyer was making 15 knots, fast enough to close quickly, but slow enough for accurate sonar tracking. Mitchell called out bearings every 30 seconds, her voice calm despite the tension, confirming the submarine's position with each update. At 1,000 yards, Morrison could see the attack mentally, visualizing the submarine's position beneath the dark water, calculating its depth and heading from the sonar returns. Reynolds stood ready at the Hedgehog control station, one hand on the firing lever, eyes on the range indicator that would signal the precise moment to fire. The optimal firing range for Hedgehog was between 200 and 250 yards, close enough for accurate placement, but far enough that the submarine couldn't maneuver out of the pattern before the projectiles arrived. Too close and the bombs might not arm properly. Too far and the submarine might detect the attack and take evasive action. At 400 yards, Morrison ordered speed reduced to 12 knots, ensuring steady motion through the water for the critical final approach. The ship's motion smoothed as the engineering team maintained perfect propeller revolutions. Every crew member understood that success depended on mathematical precision. Course, speed, range, and timing all had to be exact. At 300 yards, Morrison owled out the final approach command, her voice carrying across the bridge with absolute authority. Reynolds acknowledged, her hand tightening on the firing lever, eyes fixed on the range indicator counting down the distance. Mitchell continued calling bearings, confirming the submarine remained steady on course, apparently unaware that death was approaching. At 250 yards, Morrison gave a command that would change naval warfare forever. "Fire Hedgehog." Reynolds threw the firing lever. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. 24 spigot mortars fired in a rippling salvo lasting less than 1 second, the sound like rapid thunder across the destroyer's foredeck. The projectiles arced into the dark sky, 65 pounds of steel and explosive each, following precise ballistic paths calculated to converge on a single point 250 feet ahead of Vanessa's bow. Aboard U-657, the sonar operator suddenly shouted a warning. He had detected multiple splashes entering the water ahead of the boat, but before Goldnitz could react, before he could order emergency dive or emergency turn, the first Hedgehog bomb struck U-657's forward pressure hull just after the torpedo room. The explosion was catastrophic. 35 pounds of torpex detonated on contact, the shaped charge effect driving explosive force directly through the submarine's hull. The pressure wave propagated through U-657's interior at supersonic speed, killing everyone in the forward compartments instantly. Water under tremendous pressure surged through the breach in seconds. But there was no time for the submarine to sink from flooding. 2 more Hedgehog bombs struck almost simultaneously, one hitting amidships near the control room, another striking the aft battery compartment. Each explosion ripped through the pressure hull, the submarine's essential structural element that allowed it to operate underwater. The triple impact broke U-657's back structurally, the keel fracturing under the combined explosive force.
The submarine, designed to withstand water pressure at depth, could not withstand multiple internal explosions. The boat broke in half, the forward section immediately flooding completely, while the aft section, still containing trapped air, began a catastrophic uncontrolled descent. Aboard Vanessa, the crew heard 3 distinct explosions through the hull, the unmistakable sound of hedgehog bombs finding their target. Morrison felt vindication and horror simultaneously. The weapon worked exactly as designed, but she understood that men were dying in those explosions, drowning in the dark as their submarine disintegrated around them. Reynolds marked the time, 03:42 hours, 3 minutes from initial contact to confirmed kill. The speed of the engagement was unprecedented in anti-submarine warfare. Mitchell's sonar showed the target breaking up, the single strong return fragmenting into multiple weak contacts as the submarine sections separated and debris scattered. Within 90 seconds of the Hedgehog impact, sonar contact was lost completely as U-657's remains sank into the depths. Morrison ordered Vanessa to continue circling the area, watching for survivors or debris that might confirm the kill. As dawn spread across the ocean, the evidence appeared. A large oil slick marked where U-657 had died, rainbow patterns spreading across the gray Atlantic swells. Debris began surfacing, pieces of wooden decking, personal items, clothing, and technical equipment, undeniable proof of the submarine's destruction. There were no survivors. The speed and violence of Hedgehog attack left no time for escape.
U-657's entire crew of 49 men died in those 3 explosions, or in the immediate aftermath as the broken submarine sank to crushing depth. For Morrison, the moment was bittersweet. She had achieved what every escort commander sought, the confirmed destruction of an enemy submarine threatening her convoy. But she understood the human cost. 49 men who had never returned home, families who had received telegrams reporting loved ones lost at sea. This was the terrible arithmetic of war, necessary killing that remained killing nonetheless. News of the kill spread rapidly through the escort group and then to naval headquarters in Liverpool. Within hours, Admiral Sir Max Horton, Commander-in-Chief Western Approaches, was reviewing Morrison's after-action report with intense interest. The report was remarkable for its brevity and precision. Contact established at 2,800 yards. Approach executed at 15 knots, reducing to 12 knots. Hedgehog fired at 250 yards. 3 explosions heard within 5 seconds of impact. Submarine confirmed destroyed with all hands lost. Total engagement time 3 minutes. Horton, a former submarine commander himself, understood immediately what this meant for the Battle of the Atlantic. The traditional depth charge attack that Morrison had just replaced would have required 20 to 30 minutes of pursuit, involved dropping 50 to 100 weapons, and likely would have resulted in the submarine escaping while the escort lost contact with the convoy. Morrison had achieved a confirmed kill in 3 minutes, using only 24 projectiles, and more importantly, had done so while maintaining her position with the convoy. The merchant ships she was protecting never knew an attack had occurred. This was the breakthrough that convoy defense had desperately needed. Within the Admiralty, Morrison's success triggered immediate action. Every escort vessel in the Atlantic was to receive Hedgehog installation as rapidly as production and dockyard capacity allowed. Training programs were expanded to ensure crews understood the weapon's capabilities and limitations. Most critically, tactical doctrine was rewritten to emphasize the Hedgehog's ahead-throwing capability and contact fuse system. The old depth charge tactics, developed over years of hard experience, were officially obsolete. A new generation of anti-submarine warfare had begun, and it would be built around the principles Morrison had just demonstrated. For the German U-boat force, news of U-657's loss came slowly and incompletely. The submarine had simply disappeared, failing to report position or respond to headquarters transmissions. This was not unusual in submarine warfare, where boats were routinely lost to unknown causes, mines, accidents, depth charges, or simple mechanical failure. What the Germans didn't immediately understand was that their submarines were now facing a weapon system against which traditional evasion tactics were useless. The Kriegsmarine intelligence services had received reports of a new Allied anti-submarine weapon, but the details were fragmentary and often contradictory. Some reports described a mortar system firing multiple projectiles. Others mention ahead-throwing weapons, but the full capabilities of Hedgehog remained unknown to German naval command. This intelligence failure would prove costly as more U-boats encountered the weapon in the coming months. By April 1943, Hedgehog-equipped escorts were achieving kill rates that astounded even their own commanders. Ships that had previously spent years in escort duty without a single confirmed kill were now destroying U-boats in single engagements. The statistical evidence became overwhelming as more data accumulated. Traditional depth charge attacks achieved approximately a 5% kill rate, meaning that 20 attacks were needed on average to destroy one submarine. Hedgehog attacks achieved a 25% kill rate, 5 times more effective than conventional weapons. This dramatic improvement reflected the weapon's fundamental advantages: maintaining sonar contact during attack, contact fuses that confirmed hits, and the inescapable spread pattern that covered a submarine's likely maneuvering space. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was profound and demoralizing. Submariners who survived Hedgehog attacks, and there were few survivors, reported a weapon that gave no warning and no chance for evasion. The traditional tactics that had kept submarines alive, diving deep, turning hard, releasing decoys, were all useless against a weapon that struck from above while sonar contact was maintained and only exploded on direct impact. For men who had grown confident through surviving multiple depth charge attacks, Hedgehog represented an existential terror they couldn't overcome through skill or experience. Commander Morrison's success with Vanessa established her as one of the Royal Navy's premier anti-submarine commanders. Over the following months, she would destroy 2 more U-boats using Hedgehog, each engagement following the same pattern of careful approach, precise firing, and confirmed kill. Her tactical reports became required reading at anti-submarine warfare schools. Morrison never sought fame or recognition for her achievements, viewing submarine destruction as a necessary task rather than a source of pride. In private conversations with Reynolds, she expressed sadness at the lives lost, even enemy lives, while recognizing the moral necessity of stopping the U-boats that were starving Britain and killing merchant sailors.
This complex emotional response, duty fulfilled despite personal cost, characterized many of the most effective combat commanders of the war. The impact of Hedgehog extended beyond simple kill statistics to fundamentally alter the tactical balance in the Atlantic. U-boat commanders who had previously attacked convoys aggressively now faced a terrible calculus. Approaching a convoy meant exposing themselves to escorts equipped with weapons that killed efficiently and reliably. The old confidence that depth charges could be evaded was replaced by fear of a weapon that gave no second chances. This psychological shift reduced U-boat effectiveness even when Hedgehog wasn't directly involved in combat. Submariners became more cautious, attacking from longer ranges with less favorable torpedo solutions, breaking off approaches when escorts appeared active, and spending more time submerged at deeper depths where they couldn't effectively track convoys. All these defensive measures reduced the number of successful torpedo attacks, allowing more merchant ships to reach Britain safely. By mid-1943, the statistical evidence of Hedgehog's impact became undeniable. Monthly U-boat sinkings increased, while merchant ship losses decreased dramatically. The turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic, long sought and desperately needed, had arrived. Hedgehog wasn't the only factor. Improved radar, better aircraft coverage, more escorts, and broken German codes all contributed, but the weapon's ability to kill submarines efficiently and reliably was crucial to Allied victory. The German response to Hedgehog came too late and proved insufficient. Engineers attempted to develop acoustic decoys that might attract the projectiles away from submarines, but contact fuses made such decoys useless. Proposals for increased hull armor foundered on the simple reality that submarines couldn't carry enough armor to withstand direct hits from 35-pound Torpex charges. The most desperate German countermeasure was simply to avoid surface escorts entirely, attacking only at night from maximum range and fleeing immediately afterward. This defensive posture reduced German effectiveness catastrophically, confirming that the tactical initiative had shifted permanently to the Allies. The technological lesson of Hedgehog extended far beyond World War II. The weapon demonstrated that revolutionary improvements in military effectiveness could come from relatively simple innovations intelligently applied. Hedgehog wasn't based on exotic technology or massive industrial investment. It was a clever solution to a specific tactical problem, combined with training and doctrine that allowed its potential to be fully realized. Modern navies studying anti-submarine warfare still examine Hedgehog as a case study in weapons development. The principles it embodied, maintain sensor contact during attack, use precision rather than area effects, and provide immediate feedback on attack success, continue to influence contemporary systems. The human element in Hedgehog's success cannot be overlooked. Morrison and commanders like her made the weapon effective through skill, training, and tactical intelligence. Lesser commanders, using the same equipment, achieved far inferior results because they lacked the discipline to execute perfect approaches or the patience to wait for optimal firing solutions. This demonstrated an eternal truth of warfare, that technology alone never determines outcomes. The human factors of training, leadership, and tactical acumen remain decisive even with revolutionary weapons. For the merchant sailors whose convoys were protected by Hedgehog-equipped escorts, the weapon meant the difference between survival and death at sea. Convoy losses declined dramatically in 1943, with fewer ships torpedoed and more submarines destroyed. Men who had sailed previous Atlantic crossings watching ships explode around them now completed voyages without seeing a single attack. The psychological relief was profound, transforming merchant marine service from near-certain death sentence to merely dangerous occupation. The families who received their loved ones safely home, rather than telegrams reporting loss at sea, owed debts to innovations like Hedgehog that they would never know about. The strategic implications of Hedgehog's success extended to the highest levels of Allied war planning. With the Atlantic supply lines secured by more effective anti-submarine warfare, the buildup of forces in Britain for the invasion of Europe could proceed on schedule. The thousands of ships carrying troops, tanks, aircraft, and supplies crossed the Atlantic with acceptable losses, enabling the massive military concentration that made D-Day possible. Without Hedgehog and similar innovations, the required shipping would have been sunk and the invasion delayed or canceled. In this sense, a relatively small weapon system influenced the entire course of the war. German Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat force, recognized defeat in the Atlantic by mid-1943. In his memoirs, written after the war, he acknowledged that Allied anti-submarine capabilities had exceeded German countermeasures. While he didn't specifically mention Hedgehog by name, his description of weapons that killed submarines efficiently and left no survivors clearly referenced the system. Dönitz withdrew U-boats from the North Atlantic in May 1943, conceding that losses exceeded replacement capacity and that continuing the campaign was futile. This withdrawal marked the decisive turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic and represented one of Germany's most significant strategic defeats. The individual stories of U-boat crews killed by Hedgehog attacks represent tragedy beyond the statistics.
These were young men, many conscripted rather than volunteering, who died horrible deaths in exploding submarines at the bottom of the Atlantic. German submariners had the highest casualty rate of any branch of any nation's military during World War II, with 75% killed in action. While they served a regime whose war aims were indefensible, the individual submariners were often ordinary men caught in extraordinary circumstances. Their deaths, while militarily necessary from the Allied perspective, were human tragedies that affected families and communities across Germany. Morrison understood this complexity throughout her career, never celebrating the deaths she caused, while recognizing their necessity for victory. The technical development of Hedgehog continued throughout the war, with improved versions offering better accuracy and larger explosive charges. The Americans adopted the weapon enthusiastically, producing it in large quantities and installing it on destroyer escorts that were being built by the hundreds. The Mark X Hedgehog became standard equipment on U.S. Navy anti-submarine vessels, with American crews achieving kill rates comparable to their British counterparts. This transatlantic cooperation in weapons development and tactical doctrine represented the kind of Allied integration that Germany could never match, giving the democracies crucial advantages in military effectiveness. Post-war analysis revealed just how devastating Hedgehog had been to the U-boat force. German naval records, captured intact at war's end, showed that submarines attacked by Hedgehog-equipped escorts had survival rates far lower than those facing traditional depth charges. The weapon's contact fuse system meant that German intelligence couldn't determine attack patterns from survivor reports, because there were rarely survivors. This intelligence blindness prevented the Kriegsmarine from developing effective counter-tactics, leaving U-boat commanders facing a threat they couldn't understand or defeat. The lesson for military intelligence services was clear: weapons that leave no survivors also leave no intelligence trail, creating asymmetric information advantages. Morrison retired from the Royal Navy in 1946 with the rank of captain, having served throughout the war with distinction. She never spoke publicly about her wartime experiences, maintaining the reserve typical of her generation of warriors. Reynolds, her executive officer throughout most of the war, remained a close friend until Morrison's death in 1987. In private conversations, Morrison expressed satisfaction that her service had contributed to Allied victory, while maintaining sadness about the necessary killing that victory required. This moral complexity, pride in duty performed mixed with sorrow at human cost, characterized many veterans who had fought effectively but remained haunted by what warfare demanded of them. The legacy of Hedgehog extends into modern naval warfare through weapons that embody the same principles Morrison demonstrated in March 1943. Contemporary anti-submarine rockets, torpedoes, and missiles all maintain sensor contact during attack, use precision guidance rather than area effects, and provide immediate confirmation of hits. The technological sophistication has increased enormously, but the fundamental tactical concepts remain those proven effective by Hedgehog over 80 years ago. Naval officers studying anti-submarine warfare still examine Morrison's engagement reports, learning lessons about approach geometry, firing solutions, and the psychology of submarine commanders under attack. The Battle of the Atlantic represented industrial warfare at its most fundamental. German submarines attempting to sever Britain's maritime lifeline against Allied escorts defending merchant convoys. The outcome depended on which side could more effectively combine technology, training, intelligence, and industrial production into combat power. Hedgehog represented a crucial technological edge that, combined with Allied advantages in other areas, tipped the balance decisively against Germany. The weapon proved that relatively simple innovations, intelligently applied, could achieve strategic effects far beyond their apparent scale. For the submariners who died in Hedgehog attacks, there was no glory, no heroic last stands, just sudden violent death in the dark Atlantic depths. Their sacrifice, from the German perspective, was ultimately futile as their nation's war aims were defeated and their service contributed to a regime that committed unspeakable crimes. Yet the individual submariners remained human beings, many of them decent men serving what they believed was their duty to their country. War's tragedy is that it demands we kill people who, in other circumstances, we might have called friends. Morrison understood this paradox and carried it throughout her life. The transformation of naval warfare represented by Hedgehog influenced post-war weapon development across all military domains. The principle of precision effects, replacing area bombardment, became central to modern military doctrine. Why drop 1,000 bombs hoping one hits the target when you can guide a single weapon directly to impact? This question, first answered practically by Hedgehog's contact fuses, now dominates military technology from air-to-ground missiles to artillery shells. The revolution in military affairs that defines contemporary warfare began, in part, with a relatively simple mortar system firing projectiles into the Atlantic in 1943. The human stories behind the statistics deserve remembrance. Commander Morrison and her crew on HMS Vanessa performing their duty with skill and courage despite the emotional costs. The U-boat crews who died in explosions they never saw coming, serving a terrible cause but dying as bravely as any warriors. The merchant sailors who survived to reach port because escorts like Vanessa kept the submarines away from their ships. All these people, Allied and German, military and civilian, were caught in circumstances that demanded they risk or take lives for causes larger than themselves. Their individual experiences, multiplied millions of times across all theaters of World War II, represent humanity's capacity for both terrible violence and remarkable courage. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.